Welcome to Full Press, a media criticism podcast where listeners can escape the mainstream media echo chambers for a precious 40 minutes every 2 weeks. I'm Harrison Lowman, managing editor of The Hub, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Tara Henley and Peter Menzies. How are you two doing?
Just great, thanks.
Not bad at all.
Guys, we are in three provinces right now. We are spanning parts of the country. I'm in Quebec for some R&R. Peter is in Ottawa. He should be in Calgary. And Tara's in Toronto. So in reality, I guess we're just we're in some sort of triad or something.
We're just cosmopolitan.
Yeah. We're anywheres, not somewheres. Kidding, kidding. What I will say is that, guys, I wish you were with me together in this room in Charlevoix, Quebec, because it is episode 10, if you can believe it. We have done 10 of these things. It calls for some sort of celebration. I should shoot a firework over the mountains here near the St. Lawrence or something. But congratulations, you two, for surviving this long, and thanks for joining me on this wild ride.
Thanks. It's very fun.
Thanks very much. It's been a lot of fun. Learned a lot so far, and we'll learn more.
Good, good. I love when young people can teach more older people things. Things we're going to touch on today. Elbows down on Prime Minister Carney's tariffs. CBC takes another shot at Poilievre after the election guns fall silent. And Tara's going to tell us about an underground railroad for American academics to Canada. So that should be fun. But let's start off with elbows down. Uh, this segment is going to all be about angles. And we heard for many months that Canada was pushing back with retaliatory tariffs, that it was no holds barred, elbows up, push back against the US. Carney says counter tariffs of our own will be designed to cause maximum pain on the United States. Lots of talk about crises. And then what do we find out months later, Peter? Is that what happened?
No, no, it is. No, it isn't. Actually, what happened is what the Eurasia Group, where the Prime Minister's wife works, predicted just before the election that shortly after the election, Canada would, his words, quietly fold. That might be an extreme way of putting it, but it's definitely not the crushing force that Mark Carney referred to in the French debate that he would deal with that he would use to deal with Donald Trump. So yeah, it's well, I mean, who could guess what was said during an election campaign isn't what is happening after, right?
So
That's never happened before.
here's the crushing force part. In March, Canada, plans to impose new import taxes of 25% on $60 billion of US made goods. Then we brought in our own auto tariffs in response to Trump. But on April 16th, during the election, despite the rhetoric we heard, the government decides to eliminate counter tariffs on most US products until October to allow businesses, the government says, relief and to ready their supply chains. This all takes place on May 7th. They're enacted the day after Trump meets Carney in the White House. It included goods and manufacturing, food and beverage packaging, healthcare, public safety, national security. You get the picture. It's a lot of stuff. Counter tariffs remain on orange juice, coffee, clothing, cosmetics, and other things there. A group called Oxford Economics, a global advisory firm, says that our tariffs are either gone or near zero in most cases. Did the media pick up on this, Tara, as far as you could see?
Well, I think just zooming back for a second, I would say in terms of the strategy, I think it's debatable whether the strategy is a good strategy or not. But, we know that you're probably not going to win in a trade war with the US and specifically not with Donald Trump. And so I think we can set aside the issue of strategy and look at the issue of coverage. And Spencer Fernando, a writer in Canada, has pointed out that this was covered in the media. There are a number of stories where this was covered. And I think we take that point, and I'm glad that he pointed that out. He says that, just because you personally didn't notice a story doesn't mean other people didn't notice it, doesn't mean it wasn't part of the public conversation. I take that point. I will say, though, that the larger narrative here in the media, the one that was repeated hundreds of times a day across the entire media, was about this being an existential threat from the US and about Mark Carney in particular being very well positioned to deal with it. And the Liberal Party itself really played this as a fear election. They scared the daylights out of the boomers with this idea of Canadian annexation. And I don't know that the coverage really made a dent in that overall narrative. I'm not sure that it impacted the broader conversation. And as journalists, I think we should just think about if our job here is to provide the most fulsome picture of reality possible so that the electorate can decide how they want to be governed. Did we fall a little bit short in this instance? I think it's worth asking that.
Yes. It was published, Peter, and you drew my attention to this little publication, which I don't think many Canadians are aware of. The Canadian Gazette, the official newspaper of the government of Canada. Yes, our government has a newspaper, published these decisions. It may have been published, as you said. There was a lot of focus on the auto side of things and those dropping off. But the bigger story, the numbers, the narrative, I don't think was there. One thing, I don't know, Peter, I want to get your sense of this. I think journalists, as we've said repeatedly, are bad at math. So, like, we didn't do the addition on our part, which is like, okay, how many of these counter tariffs are being dropped? And as a whole, how much do they represent of what is the pie graph that is our counter tariff, counter punch as a whole? Will these counter tariff drops, be temporary or lasting? We'll have to see what happens. It wasn't a secret that they were doing this, maybe, Tara, but certainly it was under the radar, and certainly the stories that came out completely favored, the story that the Liberals wanted to tell during this election. Peter, am I right or am I wrong here?
No, you're pretty much right. I mean, what most interesting is that the Liberals' costed out platform contained $20 billion worth of revenue from those retaliatory tariffs. And woof, that's gone. Like $20 billion is actually quite a bit of money. And it's not easy. Does that mean, I mean, as somebody asked, I'm sure, I'm confident somebody must have asked the question, how are you going to make up for that $20 billion and still achieve your the goals in your platform? Or does that just mean that that's an additional $20 billion that's going to go, into deficit or debt for? What I find most interesting, though, is that apparently in the English debate, Carney actually said that he was backing back away from that he didn't
He
support
signaled
the
it.
tit for tat tariffs. So
Dollar for dollar.
not
Yeah.
only did the journalists kind of miss it, so did the conservatives. It's like, how do you let that one just go right by? Because the guy just said, I mean, it's not like he hid it there. He actually said that that was a strategic shift. But I think it's probably an example of once a narrative gets rolling, you can't stop it. It just people get a certain sense of things in their head, and that's where it goes. And that's where somewhere along the line there has to be somebody in the journalistic system, some grumpy old editor, who says, "Hey, wait a second. What are you talking about? Where's this going? What's happening?" Some questioning, some pushback.
Wasn't the conservatives' whole narrative at first sneaky Carney? Like, this is being served up on a silver platter if your narrative is sneaky Carney, and they didn't take it. There's also talk of, and I sent this to you guys a few minutes ago, John Ivison from the National Post, a source which Peter hates, an unnamed source, telling him that Carney flagged to the president in their discussions that he said, "Listen, you're gonna go pretty hard on you in the election, and it's part of our campaign here." What did you make of that, Tara?
Well, like Peter, I don't love stories that are premised on unnamed sources. They are not replicable. And so it's very hard to know, isn't it? I don't like that kind of reporting, and I don't think it's helpful or productive. And so I feel reticent to comment on it when you can't verify it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, singled unnamed sources are like, nothing against John. He's a wonderful guy, but I just don't believe stories that have a single unnamed source.
Mm-hmm. I want to end this section by saying, like, journalists get criticized for being stenographers when it comes to press releases. It would help if we actually read the press releases sometimes, because in this case, like, they did say they were doing a lot of this stuff. Like, you literally didn't even if you copied this press release, you'd be like, oh, interesting. But it kind of went over our heads. It's really weird, like, collectively for that to occur. So I just we'll put a pin in that, but I think it's something that we'll look back on, and hopefully we'll take a chapter in some sort of journalism school history book at universities. Let's move on to the CBC. And we get flack for going after the CBC often, but when they serve up things like this, I think it's valid. This was a particularly egregious case. Peter sent this clip to me. It's CBC responding to Poilievre responding to the appointment of Carney's new cabinet. They basically felt that it was more of the same. They weren't impressed with his tone. They didn't like that he went after new ministers who were old ministers in the Trudeau government. Anyway, we're going to play this clip, and then we'll come back, and I'm going to get Peter's response to what we just saw.
He says he wants the country to succeed. He then spent the next 15 minutes talking about all the ministers who were there previously and the things they did to ruin the country.
A style and approach from Mr. Poilievre, Rosie, that would suggest it's almost as if he won the election rather than lost the election and lost his own seat. Talking about how he's going to stand there in defense of Canadians. He'll only be able to stand there, actually in the chamber behind him, because of the goodwill of the Prime Minister, who's going to call an early by-election for Mr. Poilievre so he can run in one of his MP seats in Alberta at the cost of close to $2 million to have a by-election, all while he stays in Stornoway throughout this. So it's interesting that given that sequence of events and given those series of factors, that it was that kind of approach and response to things there from Mr. Poilievre. Going after Stephen Guilbeault, talking about the radical environmental agenda, blaming Sean Fraser for the housing crisis, which is... Sean Fraser's I don't think he's 40 yet, or he's just 40. I don't think he caused the housing crisis in Canada.
Not.
All right. So, Peter, what did you think when you saw that?
I was thinking, like, just what we were talking about, how after an election, it's time to reflect on where you are. And one of the things, it's given that the CBC just had a near-death experience during the election, where 40% of the population voted for a party that was keen to defund it, that you would have thought they'd try to be aware of that, like read the room. But that was like really bad, right? There was no need for that. They're criticizing the opposition leader for acting like an opposition leader. Like, I mean, you could, a more sympathetic broadcaster would have looked at that and they would have said, "Wow, look at that guy. He's back, like he's not backing down. He's getting up off the floor. He's throwing a few punches. Wow, this is really cool," right? Which conservatives might have found that inspiring. You could take that approach, which wouldn't have been that professional either.
Yes.
But as commentators, let the guy say what he has to say, reflect on what it means. But I mean, for Cochrane to imply that he should be grateful because the Prime Minister said he would call an early by-election. Prime Minister didn't say he'd call an early by-election. He said he would call it in due course and not play any games. So why are you supposed to be grateful to the Prime Minister for not playing games on you? Like, he just threw in all those little shots, like you lost your seat. Oh, the by-election's going to cost $2 million. Just gratuitous shots that really didn't matter. I mean, just say, wow, that was tough. He came out swinging or something like that. Liberals won't like that at all. Conservatives probably will. As presenters of the news, that would have been appropriate. This was entirely inappropriate and deeply disappointing.
Tara, what did you think?
Also found this very unfortunate. There's two things. There, what was said, and then there is the way that it was said. And so on the what was said point, these talking points, unfortunately, very much align with Liberal Party talking points. And I think that the CBC should be extremely cautious about that. And the second point, how it was said, the commentary was really dripping with scorn, with condescension. with animosity. And I've seen both of these commentators perform in ways where this is not the case. So I would really, again, just caution the CBC. These clips are not helpful to them. And this is a situation in which the commentary is extremely one-sided, and you do have to think, as a public broadcaster funded by taxpayer dollars with a mandate to reflect Canadians back to other Canadians and to show the full diversity of the country, that this falls down in this instance. And that, as Peter pointed out, they just really can't afford this right now. There should be increased efforts right now to try to understand the 40% of the country that votes a different way and that would, in fact, like to see them eradicated. So I think there needs to be renewed efforts. And just beyond that, beyond journalism, beyond the ability of the CBC to thrive and survive in a new era, just from a political polarization perspective, this is really unfortunate. Like, this is really fueling an unfortunate polarization in this country. We need to try to understand each other more and be more complex in our coverage and more multifaceted. And it's kind of time to meet that moment. And I just really encourage CBC to do so.
I just don't know, Tara, like what incentive do they have to change given the election result and the money's offered to them? Like, if anything, it's like, as I was saying, the guns fall silent on the election. And then for some, it's like, here's how we really feel about this person. That's what it feels like, at least. It's like, we don't like him. We don't like the remarks he's made about the broadcaster. And then that sort of comes out in spades. And it's that tone that we've talked about repeatedly from the CBC, Tara, like a holier than thou sort of preachy tone. It really sucks to see that, because, if there's a stereotype that they lean left, why would you lean into that? Like, wouldn't you consciously try to not meet the stereotype? There's also, Peter, this thing of like, how hard, let's make this about journalism here. How hard should journalists be covering the opposition, and how does that compare to covering like those sitting in government? Like, when it comes to accountability and holding politicians' feet to the flames, should it be equal, opposition versus government, or is there, a difference there?
It should be fair. And I mean, if the opposition is lying, then you should serve a corrective, play a corrective role in that. But the opposition doesn't have power. It just has influence. I mean, we just had an opposition that was able to actually get rid of the carbon tax and the previous prime minister and still lose an election. So it's not like it doesn't have influence. It has some power, but it doesn't have ultimate power. And where journalism should be focused, and I don't think it needs to be a 50-50 proposition, but the majority of the time, while not ignoring the opposition, should be focused on those who are in power, those who have the ability to change how we live. And that's absolutely where the focus seems to have been. This displays a preference for holding the opposition to account, a sort of how dare they, and it was almost vengeful in my mind. It was like, yeah, 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 yeah. We got $150 million and you lost your seat. Ha ha. Right? It was just like, I don't want to, like, make me love you. I stop doing this. Very
Make
frustrating.
me love you. There's
I would
the
also like to add too that there is a implication here of the audience as well, which I think that we need to consider. I had an interview with one of the subscribers on my podcast recently, and they were pointing out, they had mentioned a politician who was going out and calling Pierre Poilievre dangerous over and over and over again. And that the implication then is that those who would vote or support for someone like that are also dangerous. And I think that the media needs to be conscious of that dynamic as well as politicians. And that if you are heaping scorn on a politician, you are also heaping scorn on the 40% of Canadians who thought that person was the best person to lead this country. And so you need to dial that back a little bit, because you don't want to lose the public.
Well, this is the thing, Tara. Like, yeah, guilt. You're bigoted or dangerous by association through traveling in the lane next to the guy. how should they cover him appropriately? Like people are going to say you guys are we're lackeys for Poilievre and all the criticism we've launched at the CBC for criticizing him. By all means, there's criticism to launch at him. The guy just lost an election where he was like 30 points up a few months ago. He did appear sort of smarmy in the clip that you can watch his reaction to the cabinet. He continued to use slogans, which I don't know, we could argue didn't really work come election change. His rhetoric remains harsh. A lot of this is just, who the guy is. How much will he have to change to actually potentially win? Like, Peter, how can they like what should that clip have looked like for it to have been fair, as you say?
Well, first of all, I mean, the presenters shouldn't own the position, right? Like if you want to do a bit on what went wrong with Pierre Poilievre and his campaign and do a breakdown and do a critique on it. There's no shortage of people you can put on a quick panel and have one of those presenters interview them, and they could say all the things that those presenters just said. The difficulty for the CBC is they put themselves in the position of owning that bias and owning that criticism, which they should never do. Like in journalists, even when they ask questions, should be careful not to own the question as if it's their personal opinion. It should be, sir, your critics have said, or sir, Harrison Lowman, that guy at the Hub said the other day, said this about you, right? What do you think about that? What do you think about Mr. Lowman's opinion? And don't make it yours. So do whatever you can not to own the position. But this is a sloppiness that's come into it too frequently, where you don't need that. You can cover all those things if you want to do if you want to do a takedown of Pierre Poilievre, there's, like I said, you can put a panel together get Corey Tanique in there, like everybody, all the usual suspects, and they'll do it for you.
That was the thing. I guess they were their own panelists. Like they're two of the most prominent hosts at the CBC, which hosts major shows, which when you hear that clip, you then think, okay, how are they then going to treat the guy in, next week's show? Tara, is there a way you could have seen this done in a way where you're like, okay, you're nodding your head and saying, okay, people are being treated fairly here?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And just to roll back to your point about people thinking that we may be lackeys for the Conservatives, I just want to remind viewers and listeners that I did not vote in this election because I'm working so hard to try to be objective, and that in the past I've been historically an NDP voter. So just take that information for what it's worth. I will also say that I think this could easily have been done just by having more voices on the network as well. So if you want to explore that viewpoint that they have, that is certainly, I'm sure, shared by some liberals across the country as well, then fine. But just balance it with other views. So that the whole point being that Canadians can take in the range of information, take in the range of perspectives and views, and make up their own minds.
Oh, if only. Okay, moving to block 3. I'm going to call this, you better laugh at this, Tara, because I spent 2 minutes putting it together. Sunbirds. These are academic, rather than snowbirds, these are academics moving northward to the Great White North to potentially escape Trump, we think. There's more to the story here. Vanity Fair has covered it, the New York Times, the Toronto Star, MSNBC.
Toronto Life, Matt Galloway, Front Burner, David Common. Yes, this has gotten a lot of press. And I kind of wanted to get into it this week because the New York Times released an opinion video with these 3 academics, Jason Stanley.
These are Yale professors. Yep.
Yale professors, yes. Jason Stanley and Tim Snyder and Marcy Shore, who have left Yale to come to the Monk School here in Toronto at the University of Toronto. And the video is quite alarmist. It has very ominous music. It is overlaid with footage, pretty disturbing footage of prisons. There is references to 1930s Germany and people fleeing the regimes then. It is a very, very strong statement. And I think it's just interesting to pull back a little bit and to look at the story as a whole, because my contention would be that this is overly alarmist and that it's, that the New York Times in running this perhaps risks taking a hit on its credibility. So the story here, the three academics coming to the Munk School, it's a little more complicated than is presented in that video. Tim Snyder moved last summer, and when he left Yale, he wrote a very long piece about leaving Yale, stressing he was not leaving Yale because of Donald Trump.
Can I give a quote, Tara? Like, you
Yes.
sent this to me. I did not leave Yale because of anything Trump is doing. The chronology and the psychology are all wrong. I was not and am not fleeing anything. And yet.
And yet, so that piece talks about his motivations for leaving Yale, and also says that if Kamala Harris had gotten in, he would not have come back. So that's a very strong statement. Jason Stanley sounds like a little bit more of mixed motives, has talked about his desire to raise his children here in Canada, has talked about concerns that academics will be targeted by the Trump regime. But also has talked quite prominently about how much of an opportunity he sees this at the Munk School, and that it's going to be a leading sort of champion of democracy in terms of the world, and how much he wanted to join that. Also, Marcy Shore has said this week on Jane Costin's podcast that she herself is, I think the term she used was, a neurotic catastrophist by nature. So that she knows that this has been very alarming to her personally. And she talked about when Trump was elected, being in her office, vomiting and having a very hard time pulling herself together to go and teach her class. So we should sort of pay attention to that signal as well. But as a whole, this story first surfaced in March, and there were a round of interviews in March, including on several CBC shows and in Toronto Life. And then this is now being sort of resurfaced again in May. And you just sort of need to ask, for what purpose? I mean, I think that, to be fairly skeptical, there are professional incentives for making these kinds of statements. And we have seen during the first Trump era that the media was very incentivized to be hyperbolic about the Trump threat. My position is that the actual actions that Trump is taking are already concerning. We don't need to inflate that with concerns about being in 1930s Germany, and that in doing so, we like I said, we risk a hit to credibility, but also we risk losing public trust.
This is the thing. Like, basically, if you just pull the lens back, is this a story? Is this a story about three prominent academics that study totalitarianism? You know, they know this stuff better than anyone. They know the warning signs, and they're the first of what will be many in a line of migration from prominent American universities. Like a brain drain highway into Canada, because Trump is, in their words, a fascist, and they study fascism, so they should know? Or is this just three individuals who, for various reasons, other than what I just described, made the decision to come up here? Maybe some of what I just described is part of the mix, and they're outliers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly no one's discounting that they're extremely concerned about Trump, but this story is far more complicated than it was presented, and I think we should really be careful of that dynamic.
A lot of the attention being given to Snyder because, like, he's the granddaddy of studying totalitarianism, right? He wrote On Tyranny, sold what appears to be millions and millions of copies. I listened to him speak. Guy's brilliant. Like, I encourage everyone to read his books. But Peter, what did you make of all this? And I say, Snyder says, I'm not fleeing. Toronto Star, prominent Yale professors flee Trump's America. Like, that's sort of the narrative. What did you make of how this story was treated?
Well, it's kind of like they used to say in newsrooms: never let the facts get in the way of a good story. This feeds an ongoing narrative, fantasy actually, that Canadians like to believe that all Americans secretly want to be Canadians, that we are a refuge, that we're in a nice place and they're a nasty place. Whereas the facts of the matter are, in recent years anyway, is that 3 times as many Canadians move to the US every year as Americans move to Canada. And there are 9 Americans for every one of us. So that is a substantial difference. And it very contrary to this fantasy that we like to embrace, that look at these poor Americans, they're They come to Canada where it's also democratic and that sort of stuff, where we freeze people's bank accounts and we have all kinds of
Mhm.
freedoms that go on, and we have to stop. Media need to be very, very careful about fueling fantasies. And I think this is kind of one of them. If they went to, they thought going to the University of Toronto, I read one quote, I'm going to go to the University of Toronto where I will have freedom to speak as I wish. Well, you might ask Jordan Peterson about that, right? He might have a contrary opinion on what it's like speaking freely at the University of Toronto.
Tara,
Anyway, I
at the
just
sa-
sort of say those things in contrast, but yeah, that's we need to stop doing that.
at the same time, Tara, like you said, we can't lose, we can't forget the fact that wild stuff is going on south of the border, and I'm interested in how you would cover that adequately. Have compared to how we lost our minds in the last Trump administration, comparing it to this one, people would argue it's far worse. People denied entry at borders for making fun of Trump via text on their phones. Legal residents of the United States sent to foreign prisons without due process. His battle with the courts. The gleeful cruelty that many describe the administration taking towards illegal migrants, etc. Like, how do we properly sort that in our minds?
Yeah, we have a great tool to deal with that, and that
What's it
is called
called?
journalism. Like, yes, these are very deeply concerning news developments, 100%. And it gets back to this idea of trying to really dig down into the complexity of stories, to relay the facts, to practice basic journalism. It reminds me, I was interviewing a journalism professor a couple of years ago, David Greenberg, who's a huge proponent of objectivity. And one of the things he said is, objectivity has never been Donald Trump's friend. So we don't need to go over the top. The facts are already concerning enough.
Why do we want to go over the top though, Peter? Why is that like our inclination? I can't imagine like you're that Toronto Star editor and the journalist comes to you and say, "Hey, I don't know if they're totally leaving because of this exclusively." And the editor's like, "Come on, can you like, I don't know, massage it? I don't know. Have you seen massaging go on in newsrooms? Why is there this inclination to go over the top?"
Well, I've seen plenty of massaging go on in
Yeah.
newsrooms, and
Yeah.
no doubt about that. I think it goes back to 2016 when Trump was first elected, when journalism in the States first, and then it got picked up in Canada very quickly, decided that they had somehow failed. That Donald Trump's election meant that, and the fact he could tell so many lies while he was doing it, that this two-sidism had to go, that objectivity had to go out the window, and et cetera, et cetera. Which I think was a mistake, as you said, quoted there. Objectivity is not his friend. So I think the best thing journalists can do is be very, very good at journalism, and not worry about being activists, because your job is not to get rid of Donald Trump. Your job is to tell the truth, and that will allow the people to make an intelligent decision about Donald Trump eventually. And so just be good at your job. Maintain public trust and faith in the work that you do, so that when I do read about somebody being, shut down at the border, or, legal immigrants being deported illegally and that sort of stuff, I believe it. Because lots
Mhm.
of people don't. And that's kind of the problem, right? Like, Trump got elected originally and subsequently by saying everything the media tells you is nonsense. It's all fake news, right? He seized the distrust that people were having for journalists. Not everybody by any means, but a significant enough portion that he was able to capitalize on it. So restore faith, restore your relationship with the reader.
Get the story right. Just get the story right.
So
Yep.
what would be the right story, Tara? Like, what should the headline have said? You would have probably
Three people
separated
move.
them, not put them in a group, and you would have what?
3 academics with complicated lives and mixed motivations. Also very concerned about
You've
Donald Trump.
lost us. I'm not clicking on
Decide.
that. I'm not clicking on that. That's bogus. This is the problem, guys. All the fun stuff, all the incentives are to, exaggerate. So Okay, let's get to some people who were doing their jobs, Peter, and end things here. We have a bouquet this week, and I talked about the Great White North. Let's look at the real Great White North. You want to throw up a bouquet into the land of ice. What's the news outlet that's getting it, and why do they deserve it?
It is Corey LaRocque, the editor at the Nunatsiaq News in Iqaluit.
Yeah.
And he wrote an excellent editorial about the use of unnamed sources, which we were talking about earlier. And I mean, I noted that the Globe and Mail had a story a couple of weeks, about 10 days ago, about where there were 7 unnamed sources. Anyway, that, as you know, that gets under my skin in terms of that, because it's, in my view, not the way it should be done. Anyway, Corey writes, in the past 10 years, national news organizations have become increasingly comfortable using unnamed sources. When news outlets do that, it amounts to saying, trust us, while the journalistic tradition has been like high school math class, show your work. It's important for readers to know the source of information reported to them. Readers can then decide for themselves how much credibility to give it, how important it is, and how trustworthy both the source and the news organizations are. So, a lesson in good journalism practice coming from Nunavut, and one of its, if not its leading media.
Here, here.
Chapeau.
Awesome. There are
Very well.
fantastic journalists all across the country, and we salute you.
Yeah, who are warm or freezing or whatever.
And made me feel a lot less lonely.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
We're all for making Peter feel a lot less lonely. I'm not feeling lonely today. I'm happy that we're just wrapping up our 10th episode. Thank you both again for joining us this week, and for our viewers and listeners as well. We will see you again in a couple weeks. Be well. See you later.
Take care. Be